The launch of the M3 medium tank into production was a forced decision. The American Army urgently needed medium tanks equipped with a powerful 75mm gun. The most advanced American vehicle of that time had such a gun, but it was mounted in the hull, not in the turret. The reason was simple. Designers simply did not have a turret large enough to house such a big weapon. Therefore, a modified version of this tank went into series production, featuring the large gun in the hull, a smaller 37mm gun in an upper turret, plus yet another small machine gun cupola on top. As soon as this design was approved, the engineers returned to work, knowing this temporary solution required replacement as quickly as possible. Work on the new tank began on the 1st of February 1941, and already by the 18th of April, the Rock Island Arsenal presented 5 different design variants. All proposed models used the running gear from the M3 tank, but the upper hull section was developed from scratch. Now, the tank featured a single turret, much larger than the previous one. The choice of armament was highly varied. One variant mounted a 75mm gun, another carried a pair of 37mm guns, a third featured a 105mm howitzer, a fourth had 3 large 12.7mm machine guns, and the fifth carried a British 57mm 6-pounder gun. Some historians believe that the presence of the British gun proves the influence of the Canadian Ram tank on the new design. The Ram was also a medium tank based on the M3, but in fact this was not the case. First, the Canadian tank brought to the Aberdeen Proving Ground for testing was armed with a 2-pounder gun, not a 6-pounder. Second, this vehicle arrived in the United States only in July 1941, when the concept of the new American tank had already been finalized. The version with the foreign gun was never chosen, but the weapon that was eventually adopted for the new tank still had European origins. Its 75mm gun was based on the French model of 1897, which the Americans produced under license. The new tank received approval for development, and in May 1941, a full-scale wooden mock-up was built. It still retained some features of its predecessor, a small machine gun cupola on top of the main turret and side hatches in the hull. After reviewing the model, it was decided to build 2 tanks armed with 75mm guns, one with a cast hull assembled at the Aberdeen Proving Ground, and another with a welded hull manufactured at Rock Island Arsenal. Since the turret design was to be the same for both versions, only one prototype turret was built and installed on the cast hull vehicle. The tank at Aberdeen was fully assembled on the 2nd of September 1941. The prototype turned out to be quite different from its predecessor, though the influence of the M3 was still visible. The most important difference was the large single turret housing one main gun. On top of the turret, there was no longer a small machine gun cupola, though the machine gun itself had not disappeared. In addition to the 2 fixed machine guns in the front armor, a third was added in a movable ball mount. The side hatches in the hull remained, but they were smaller than those on the M3 and lacked pistol ports and viewing slits. The driver and his assistant, who also operated the hull machine gun and the radio, could exit the tank through hatches in the roof of the driving compartment. The driver's hatch had a periscopic viewing device in addition to a vision slit in the front armor. The driver could raise his seat while driving and operate the tank with his head out of the hatch. His assistant was less fortunate. He could observe only through the vision slit. To fit a sufficiently powerful gun, the opening for the turret on the new tank was enlarged to an impressive size of 69 inches, about 175 centimeters in diameter. Since the new 75mm gun was not yet ready, the prototype was equipped with an older model of the gun mounted in a special installation with a stabilizer that helped to fire more accurately while moving. Because this mount and stabilizer had been designed for a longer gun, a distinctive counterweight was attached to the barrel of the old model to balance the structure. In this installation, the gun could depress downward to -12 degrees and elevate upward to +25 degrees. In addition to the main gun, a paired 7.62mm machine gun was installed in the turret, and a special hatch was made for the crew to fire their small arms. This hatch also included a vision device on the side of the turret. The armor thickness increased as well. Now the front of the turret had an impressive 3 inches or 76 millimeters of protection. However, the frontal armor of the hull remained unchanged. A radio station was placed in the rear part of the turret. The Americans were already aware of the British requirements, so they provided the option to replace the radio with a British model. To clear the turret of powder gases after firing, an exhaust fan was installed on the roof. The lower part of the prototype had nothing new. The tank was powered by the same Wright Whirlwind aircraft engine, had the same bogies with coil springs, and used rubber metal tracks just like the previous model, the medium tank M3. As on its predecessor, a commander's radio set was installed in the right projection of the hull, which differed from the turret-mounted one by its communication ranges. To allow the antenna to exit, a bulge was added in the front armor next to the assistant driver's hatch. After the tank was inspected on the 2nd of September by a delegation from the Armored Forces and the Ordnance Committee, several changes were made to the design. The side hatches were removed and the small machine gun turret on the roof was also discarded, although it is possible that this decision had been made much earlier, since it does not appear in any known photographs of the prototype. This satisfied the committee, and on the 5th of September, a recommendation was made to standardize the tank under the name Medium Tank M4. It was decided to produce it with both welded and cast hulls. The latter received the designation Medium Tank M4A1. The tank was officially adopted in October 1941. The pilot batch began assembly in November, but that did not mean that the M4 stopped evolving. Almost immediately, it was recommended to replace the removed turret with a 12.7mm or 50 caliber machine gun. Additional deflectors were added to the gun mount to prevent bullets and fragments from entering inside, which could jam the gun or injure the crew. This version was standardized under the name Combined Gun Mount M34. The engine compartment also needed protection from bullets and fragments, so the ventilation openings were equipped with deflectors as well. A single fan in the turret proved insufficient, so 2 more were added to the hull. One replaced the antenna of the commander's radio, which was installed only on command tanks, and the other was placed on the opposite side behind the turret. On the regular tanks, the space freed by the removed radio station was used for additional ammunition storage. The modifications on the right side of the tank did not end there. The assistant driver received a viewing device in his hatch, the same as the driver's but without the machine gun sight. He could now aim only by tracing bullets. Soon, the designers completely abandoned the inconvenient vision slits, since the covers still allowed shell fragments and bullets to enter the tank. Instead of the slits, fixed backup periscopes were installed for the driver and his assistant. Early tanks with vision slits are often referred to as direct vision tanks, although such an index was never officially used. Additional observation devices were also added to the turret. One periscope was installed in the commander's hatch and another on the roof above the loader. The periscopes could rotate a full 360 degrees, allowing the crew members to comfortably observe the battlefield. The M4 tank also differed from its prototype. The hull now included 3 fans, 1 at the rear, as on the M4A1, and 2 at the front on the roof. An additional protrusion was added for the commander's radio antenna. Other modifications introduced on the M4A1 were also incorporated into the production model. On March 6, 1942, the twin machine gun mount in the front armor was removed, a change that makes it easy to recognize the earliest vehicles. In July, the rotating sight in the turret was replaced with a simpler observation periscope. In the autumn, the tank commander received a special sighting bar in front of his viewing device, allowing him to quickly determine where the gun was aimed. In the summer, the tank's suspension system was also modified. The M4 and M4A1 models received new bogies that had been under development since January 1942. These bogies were equipped with reinforced coil springs, a return roller moved to the rear, and special skids in front of the roller to prevent the track from slipping off. Over time, these skids were lengthened, which also allows one to determine the tank's production period. In October 1942, a new gun mount was approved. Its main distinction was the addition of a telescopic sight as the primary aiming device. The movable gun shield on the turret became much wider. Some older mounts were also upgraded by adding an armored cover on the right side of the gun shield to protect the new sight. To maintain balance, a counterweight was welded onto the gun's breech. The gun depression angle on the improved mount decreased to -10 degrees. The tank was intended to be produced at all factories that had previously been assembling the earlier M3 model, but switching to the new vehicle required time. The Lima Locomotive Works began producing the M4A1 only in February 1942. In March, the Press Steel Car Company switched to the new tank, and in June, production began at Pacific Car and Foundry. Despite the fact that the M4 was officially the first in the numbering sequence, its production at Pressed Steel Car Company did not begin until July. In the same month, the tank also went into production at the Chrysler plant in Detroit. In September, manufacturing of the M4 started at the American Locomotive Company, and in January 1943, it began at the Baldwin Locomotive Works. The last to start, in May 1943, was Pullman Standard, which also produced the classic M4. In 1943, production of this tank came to an end. Pressed Steel Car Company was the first to stop, having built 1,000 tanks by September. A month later, the last M4, number 689, was assembled at Pullman Standard, and in December, the American Locomotive Company halted production after completing 2,150 tanks. Baldwin and the Detroit Arsenal lasted the longest, producing 1,233 and 1,676 tanks respectively, up to February 1944. The latter also carried out modernization and major overhauls on an additional 1,610 vehicles. The last M4 tanks built at the Detroit plant were hybrid models. Instead of a welded front armor plate, they used a cast one. This was not a direct copy of the M4A1 plate. It retained the characteristic features of the M4, such as the two front fans and the separate antenna mount. A total of 6,748 M4 tanks were produced. The decline in M4A1 production began around the same time. The Pressed Steel Car Company was the first to cease manufacturing in August 1943, switching to a more advanced M4A1 model with a 76mm gun and improved armor protection. In September 1943, the Lima Locomotive Works also ended production after completing 1,655 units. In December, after fulfilling a contract for 926 tanks, Pacific Car and Foundry ended assembly as well. In total, 6,281 M4A1 tanks were built. Among the 1,655 tanks assembled by the Lima factory, 2 were unique. The first M4A1 produced there had an old-style hull with side hatch openings, although they were welded shut. The second hull was cast without side openings, yet this tank also turned out to be special. It was named Michael in honor of Michael Dewar, the head of the British tank mission in the United States. As one might guess, Michael was sent to the British. Since the tanks were built under their contract, the vehicles received registration numbers from the British War Office. Both tanks were equipped with short-barreled guns, but Michael was later fitted with a longer one. At that time, it was also assigned a new registration number. The tanks continued to evolve even after mass production had ended. One of the most notable improvements was the addition of extra protective screens. One such screen was mounted on the right side of the turret. 3 more were placed along the hull sides to protect the ammunition storage areas, and 2 additional screens were installed in front of the driver's and assistant driver's positions in the front part of the tank. On models with cast armor, instead of attaching additional screens, thicker armor was cast directly into the most vulnerable areas. Older tanks were upgraded in field workshops right near the front lines. There were even cases where tanks with already thickened armor still had extra screens added for greater protection. In addition, crews often customized their vehicles with unofficial modifications. Improvised screens made from spare track links, sandbags, mounts for camouflage nets, and many other items. The Americans already had quite a diverse collection of engines from previous tank models, so they quickly established production of several Sherman variants. For example, a diesel version began production as early as April 1942. These tanks, equipped with diesel engines, had a significant advantage over the gasoline versions with the old aircraft-type engines. Soon after, other gasoline-powered Sherman variants appeared. The first tank fitted with the new, more powerful Ford gasoline engine, which surpassed the old one in every respect, was completed in May 1942. Even the heaviest and largest modification of the Sherman received a more reliable engine. Meanwhile, the old aircraft engine was becoming obsolete, even as the tank was being accepted into service. The prototype was originally built with an engine that ran on aviation gasoline. In September 1941, when the tank was officially adopted, it was already clear that the United States would inevitably enter the war. Under such conditions, one did not need to be a prophet to foresee a shortage of high-quality fuel. It was necessary to adapt the tank to cheaper fuel while maintaining its performance. a maximum speed of 25 miles per hour, an average climbing speed of 12 miles per hour on slopes up to 10 degrees, the ability to start at temperatures as low as minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and proper cooling performance at 125 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level. The maximum permissible octane rating for the new engine's fuel was limited to 80. Such requirements turned out to be quite demanding for the engineers of the company tasked with producing the engines to boost overall output. It was especially difficult to determine the correct compression ratio for the fuel in the cylinders. In April 1942, an engine with a compression ratio of 5.7 was tested and deemed acceptable. The nominal rotational speed of the engine increased from 1,200 to 1,800 revolutions per minute. The new engine used a richer fuel mixture and had an enlarged combustion chamber. However, the changes compared to the old version were not radical, and the engines could be upgraded during major overhauls. Production of the engine began on May 11, 1942, but it was officially adopted for service only in July. However, adoption did not mean that the military was fully satisfied with the new design. First, at low speeds, the engine's torque was rather weak. When driving in difficult conditions, the driver had to constantly shift gears or rev the engine in a low gear, which quickly caused it to overheat. All these factors negatively affected the engine's lifespan, especially during off-road driving. How much even the improved old engine lagged behind other power plants became clear after large-scale trials at the proving ground in the winter of 1943 to 1944. 16 tanks of various modifications, 4 of each type, took part in a kind of survival race. Each had to cover 4,000 miles or run for 400 operating hours. It was the engines themselves that were being tested. After failures of the suspension, transmission, or even external engine components, the tanks were repaired and the tests continued. Only the breakdown of internal parts or the loss of 1/3 of the initial power removed an engine from the competition. The Sherman tank equipped with the right engine performed rather poorly in these trials. During the tests, maintenance of the engine took 132 hours, more than some variants but less than others. At first glance, the result did not seem too bad, but none of these aircraft-derived engines lasted 200 hours of operation, breaking down on average after 166 hours. Over that mileage, the tank also required, on average, 36 hours of transmission maintenance, 93 hours for the suspension, and just over 20 hours for other servicing. It was noted separately that a great deal of time was spent maintaining the air filters. During the 23 days of testing, their cleaning and repair consumed 446 man-hours. But American tank builders did not give up. A year later, a Sherman fitted with an updated version of the Wright engine underwent desert trials over a distance of 5,000 miles, roughly 8,000 kilometers. The tank finished the course only on its 4th engine. In addition to the already known reliability issues, the vehicle had difficulty shifting gears, and some would often jam completely, especially the second. Replacing the gearbox did not solve the issue. The final drives also failed the test. The right was replaced after 2,378 miles, the left after 4,297. The suspension suffered frequent breakdowns. Springs failed on average after 1,450 miles, and support rollers after 733 miles. Over the entire run, the tank also went through 4 idler wheels. The filters performed poorly. Sand and dust were reported to heavily damage the engine and other components. Efforts to improve the Wright engine's reliability led to significant design changes, and as a result, the Powertrain Committee on April 30, 1943, recommended adopting the new version. According to American data, the engine's power increased from 432 to 493 horsepower, while fuel consumption decreased by 10%. The engine's torque also improved noticeably, from 1,328 to 1,505 pound-feet. As with the previous transition, older engines were modernized during major overhauls. The new engine was approved for production on June 17, 1943, with an order for 200 units. There was one condition. They were offered only for installation in the Hellcat tank destroyer, not in the Sherman. Upon learning about the improved engine, the British in October 1943 demanded that it also be installed in their Shermans. Tests in February 1944 on a Sherman tank demonstrated significant additional advantages of the new engine beyond the increased power. Oil consumption dropped by 35%. and cylinder temperature fell by 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The speed increased. The Sherman with the new engine covered 1.5 miles of paved track in 4 minutes and 45 seconds, 47 seconds faster than the tank with the older version of the engine. The tests also showed improved reliability. 3 new upgraded engines installed on Shermans were withdrawn from testing after 177, 219, and 231 hours respectively, while the old engine upgraded to the new standard ran for 222 hours on the tank. Compared to its predecessor, the engine's service life increased, though not by much. On April 13, 1944, the use of upgraded Wright engines on Sherman tanks was officially approved. It was a half success. On that very same day, the Wright engines were classified as secondary. Even after modernization, they still lagged far behind the Ford engine used on the best version of the Sherman. The R975 engine had at least one advantage over other power plants. Being an aircraft-derived engine, it actively drew air out of the fighting compartment. According to veterans' recollections, such an advantage seemed doubtful in winter, when an icy draft swept through the tank. But there was also a positive side. During tests in late 1942, Sherman tanks equipped with the R975 were the only ones to receive a satisfactory rating for air cleanliness inside the fighting compartment. Though not without remarks, this engine significantly helped reduce the concentration of propellant gases inside the tank after firing. After 5 shots, the amount of carbon monoxide in the fighting compartment was halved within 5 seconds in the basic Sherman model and within 17 seconds in the welded hull version. In tanks with diesel engines, this figure reached 33 seconds, in the version with the new gasoline engine, 32 seconds, and in the lengthened hull version, as much as 50 seconds. The concentration of irritating substances in the air was also lower. After 5 consecutive shots, the crew's eyes stung slightly, but this had little effect on their performance. Despite all their shortcomings, the early models of the Sherman family served long and actively. The combat history of these tanks deserves a separate story, but as proof of their effectiveness, it is enough to look at the new tank classification after the end of fighting in Europe. The basic Sherman models with a 75mm, about 3-inch gun, and improved ammunition stowage, along with the newest version equipped with the Ford engine, received the status of substitute standard, while the tanks with diesel engines, the lengthened version, and the experimental model were downgraded to limited standard. The tanks also continued to be modernized. It was on the basic Sherman chassis that the 105mm, about 4-inch howitzer was installed. After unsuccessful experiments with the lengthened version at the beginning of 1943, the gun mount was significantly redesigned and 2 improved prototypes were installed on the standard Sherman. These tanks received an experimental designation. The trials, conducted in the second half of 1943, were successful, and the vehicle was adopted under the name Medium Tank Sherman with 105mm howitzer. However, this tank also deserves its own story. Another modernization was tested on the basic Sherman. A vehicle with a mixed construction hull was fitted with a turret from the experimental T-23 tank, thus creating a new model with a 76mm 3-inch gun. This upgrade did not gain acceptance. The modification of the basic Sherman with the 76mm gun was planned for production, but the Chrysler factory built only 1 tank. The turret tested on this prototype, however, did enter mass production and was mounted on many thousands of Shermans of various modifications. The basic Sherman models received one more very noticeable improvement. The suspension with vertical volute springs, which had been used in American tank construction for nearly 10 years, was finally replaced by an improved suspension with horizontal volute springs. This new suspension had a significant advantage. Tracks 23 inches wide sharply increased the Sherman's mobility when driving through mud. Many Shermans with welded hulls received 76mm guns under somewhat different circumstances. After the end of World War II, the United States Army began actively disposing of tanks, writing them off left and right. As of 1945, the United States had 6,582 Shermans with 76mm guns. By 1950, the Americans counted only 3,202 vehicles, of which only 1,376 remained combat capable. The Cold War developed quickly, and the U.S. allies needed tanks to fight the hordes of T-34-85s that CIA agents imagined behind every bush. There was no choice. They had to install 76mm guns in the standard mounts designed for 75mm guns. In 1942, such a decision was considered unacceptable, but in 1950 it was accepted. It was recognized as the only way to obtain a sufficient number of combat-capable tanks in a short time. Welded hull Shermans modernized in this way received a new designation. Like the regular Shermans with 76mm guns and improved suspension, they were handed out to U.S. allies under the Aid for Defense program. This was not the last modernization of the tank. Decommissioned French tanks later entered Israeli service, where they were radically rebuilt. They received a new engine produced by Cummins, a 105mm gun, and other modern components. These updated tanks were designated M51, but the most advanced variant of this vehicle is often simply called the Super Sherman. They served into the 1990s, thus this tank, with all its design shortcomings, spent 50 years in service with different armies around the world. Few combat vehicles managed to achieve such success over their entire history.